Delmore was a priest ejected from his Christian circles. He became an atheist, and when he became an atheist, he found himself within an underground sect of atheists. But it wasn't long before he found himself at odds with these atheists. And the reason he found himself at odds with these atheists is because in walking away from God and refuting Christianity, he realized that Christianity was irrational. And so Delmore was a rationalist. And when he tried to engage with the circle of atheists, he found out that they were not rational, that they were biased, that they were partisan, that the way that they conducted themselves was based on emotion. And so eventually he clashed with them, and they ejected him from his circles. And he said to them, "I take it as a mark of high accomplishment to be banned from this atheist circle for being rational. Without justification or explication, you have dismissed me and removed me and accused me in this circle. Hiding behind formality doesn't magically turn your irrationality into rationality, because these atheists hid behind a set of procedures or rules, arbitrary rules that they had established that were not themselves rational, and Delmore demanded a justification for the authority behind these rules. And instead of providing this justification, they simply dismissed his conduct because it did not comport with their partisanism." He says, "Hiding behind formality doesn't magically turn your irrationality into rationality. Logic has strict rules that shatter emotive attempts to evade it. It's literally a power. Asserting that something is an error doesn't make it an error, just like asserting that God exists doesn't mean he exists. All assertions bear the burden of proof, something that was never met in the course of my dismissal. I stand justified by the very standards of rationality itself, standards I at no point violated, standards that this group has failed to uphold." And this is indeed a problem. It's the problem of irrationalism, which is so dominant and pervasive in our time. And Delmore was right to stand his ground on rational principles. He was right to reject the irrationality of his Christian circles and the irrationality of his atheist circles, because he saw that the atheists had actually not psychologically deconverted from their Christianity. They merely switched over to a different side. But their psychological function, their rational function, was still exactly the same. And Delmore understood that this was unacceptable, that this did not constitute an emancipation from the theistic form, or an emancipation from the psychological form of religion. So here we have some more words that stand against the bold, self-confident, convicted irrationalists. To maximize the quality of our thinking, we must learn how to become an effective critic of our thinking. And to become an effective critic of our thinking, we have to make learning about thinking a priority. This is not something that irrationalists do, and it's not something that irrationalists like. And it doesn't matter if they're Christian, it doesn't matter if they're atheist, it doesn't matter if they're Democrat, it doesn't matter if they're Republican, it doesn't matter what they are, what ideology they subscribe to. Irrationalists do not like these rational standards. To maximize the quality of our thinking, we have to learn how to become an effective critic of our thinking. And to become an effective critic of our thinking, we have to make learning about thinking a priority. And now, let's shatter the irrationalists who's so self-confident and so assured in his assertions about the nature of reality. What have you learned about your thinking? Did you ever study your thinking? Have you ever studied and thought about your thinking? What have you learned about the way you think, about where your thought comes from, about how it's persuaded, about how your beliefs are established? What information do you have, for example, about the intellectual processes involved in how your mind thinks? More to the point, what do you really know about how to analyze, evaluate, or reconstruct your thinking? Where does your thinking come from? How much of it is of high quality? How much of it is poor quality? How much of your thinking is vague, muddled, inconsistent, inaccurate, illogical, or superficial? Are you, in any real sense, in control of your thinking? Do you know how to test it? Do you have any conscious standards for determining when you are thinking well and when you are thinking poorly? Have you ever discovered a significant problem in your thinking and then changed it by a conscious act of will? If someone asked you to teach them, him or her, what you have learned about thinking thus far in your life, would you have any idea what that was or how you learned it? All of these questions stand as a polemical rebuke to sophists, as a polemical rebuke to irrationalists who like to go around the world asserting and making metaphysical claims, but never standing up to the burden of proof, the justification of those claims. The burden of proof is not something that any of us can escape. The burden of proof is entrenched at the foundation of thinking and stands more necessary and more inescapable than the law of non-contradiction. One thinks, well, how can this possibly be the case? That surely can't be the case. Wrong. The burden of proof, if it is denied, then the individual who denies it can never file a complaint or ask for a justification against any assertion that is made that imposes on their life or on their beliefs. In other words, if the burden of proof is denied, then the world collapses into a free-for-all. Then there is no longer a way to complain about your neighbor's beliefs, about any kind of belief that a person dislikes. That ability, that legitimacy is then shattered, because one cannot demand that someone else meet the criteria of a burden of proof that they are not willing to meet themselves. The denial of this burden leads to the absolute collapse of meaning, to the absolute collapse of beliefs. It creates a complete subjectivity surrounding the nature of belief. What have you learned about how you think? Did you ever study your thinking? What information do you have, for example, about the intellectual processes involved in how your mind thinks? More to the point, what do you really know about how to analyze, evaluate, or reconstruct your thinking? If you were thinking poorly, how would you know it? If someone was thinking fallaciously, how would you know it? If they had refuted you legitimately, how would you know it? If you don't know these things, then you're probably not very rational in your thinking. And I'm tired myself of interacting and engaging with irrationalists. I've had enough of it because they always do the same thing. They pivot to, they flee to authoritarian maneuvers to censor the power of rationality that crushes their position. They can't handle it. They don't like it. They don't know how to reply, to rebut, to refute. They do not know how to respond back or defend their position. So they revert to name-calling, they revert to censorship, they revert to a whole list of irrational tactics to try to evade the force of the argument, to try to evade the power of reason. And I have met sophist after sophist who has fallen under the weight of my rational critique only to censor me because they could not refute me. Over and over again. And we live in an irrational age. We live in an age that does not know how to reason and takes pride in engaging in irrationalism. It takes pride in its own irrationality. The time has come for rationalists to push back against sophists. The time has come for irrationalists not to allow these irrationalists to dominate within the space of the discourse, not to steamroll or bully themselves into asserting the nature of reality. The time has come to be conscious critical thinkers. Critical thinkers that have the ability to refute, to analyze poor reasoning and refute it and correct it. And the thing is, irrationalists don't like this. They become greatly offended when they are thumped by reason. And that's their problem. That's not the problem of the rationalist. If they want to be rational, then they have to abide by rational standards. If they want to throw rationality out, then they no longer have a complaint. They can no longer make a point, and they can no longer deny a point because they have denied the standards that allow us to validate points. They have denied the basis and foundation of reason. And if they do this, their complaint is dead. They refute their own position. But the tragedy of our time is that this happens all the time. And the irrationalists not only don't fail to comprehend it, they don't understand what's happening, but they don't care. The only thing they care about is asserting a narrative of power that makes them feel validated and that makes them feel empowered. They don't care about what the truth is. If you care about what the truth is, then you're slicing through the mere appearance of reality to get to the bottom of things. And if someone refutes you and you care about reality, you're appreciative, you're grateful that you were able to get to the point where you could actually bypass your own delusion and error and see the truth. Even if a person refutes you, it doesn't matter that a person who's seeking truth was refuted. We want the truth. So if someone refutes us, they're doing us a favor. They're actually helping us. How can we possibly be mad or angry at a person who saves us from error? Only irrationalists do that. That is not the way of rationalists.